Hi Year 8, so reading, carrying on with My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece today. We are getting towards the end of the book. Now what I'm going to have to do when we finish this book is go up into my library and I think just choose a book that I think or hope that you'll like and read that to you. So we'll work on that over the next couple of weeks. I'll see what I can find out for us. So going back to this book then, so you'll remember last week got to a really sad part of the story. Jamie was feeling quite down anyway because of finding out that Mum hadn't sent him the t-shirt, that Mum had been on holiday whilst he was asking her to come to parents' evening, enjoying herself, and he sort of realised that Mum has pretty much abandoned him and his sister. And then on top of that, when they got back from the talent show, couldn't find Roger, his cat, anywhere, and then the next day found him and he'd been hit by a car and had died. So it was a really, really sad point in the story last week. So we'll see where we go from here. School started again the next day. I kept expecting Roger to rub his body against my shins when I got out of bed, or jump onto my lap while I ate my Cocoa Pops, or twist his tail around my ankles as I brushed my teeth. The cottage felt empty without him. I felt empty without him. Dad got out of bed in time to take us to school. He was a bit hungover, but it didn't matter one bit. Dad's not perfect, and neither am I. He's trying, and that means everything. He hasn't done a good job, but he's done a million times better than Mum. He hasn't abandoned us. He's sad about Rose, and that's fine. Having a cat killed is bad enough. Having a daughter blown to bits must be horrid. When we pulled up outside school, Dad saw Sonia on the pavement. I could see his face in the mirror. He clenched his jaw, but he didn't shout about Muslims killed my daughter or anything like that. He didn't even tell me to keep away from her. He just said that he wouldn't be home until 6 because of work. Jazz squeezed his arm and Dad smiled in a proud way, and then he said, "Have a good day. You got an excellent report, so keep it up." I walked into school. I was still wearing the Spider-Man t-shirt, but not for Mum because she didn't send it. Roger's blood had soaked into the material, so I didn't want to take it off. I know I must have looked like a murderer or something, but I didn't care. I wanted to be close to my cat. "Here comes Sissy boy," shouted Daniel down the corridor. He was standing outside the classroom with Roger. I was scared, but I didn't go red or start shaking or run off. I walked towards him. "Sissy boy in his sad Spider-Man t-shirt." They sniggered and did a high five in the air. I walked right underneath it. Daniel kicked me in the back of the leg and it hurt, and I wanted to punch him in the face, but I didn't want to get beaten up again. Daniel smirked like he had won, and I thought about that tennis player that always comes second in Wimbledon, and for some reason that made me cross. My heart growled in my chest like an angry dog. "What a loser," Daniel shouted, so that everyone in the classroom could hear. I sat down next to Sonia and waited to see if she would glare at him or say something back. She shrank into her chair as though she was trying to hide. She didn't even look in my direction. I wanted to ask if she'd read my special card. I wanted to ask if she'd seen the snowman that looked like her and the snowman that looked like me, and if it had made her laugh. I wanted to ask why she hadn't come to the talent contest, and I wanted to tell her all about it. How Jazz had been brilliant and how I'd been brave enough to sing and dance on stage. But then I remembered that night in her garden and how she'd said, "My mum thinks you're bad news." So I didn't say any of it. I just stared at my pencil case while Mrs. Farmer did the register. First we did English, and we had to write about our fabulous Christmas and try to use paragraphs. Nothing fabulous had happened, but I didn't want to lie, so I told the truth. I wrote about the football sock full of all the things that Jazz had bought me. I described the chicken sandwiches and microwave chips and the chocolate that we ate. I explained that the best bit was when we'd sung Christmas carols at the top of our voices. And at the end I wrote, "It wasn't exactly a fabulous Christmas, but it was good because I was with Jazz." It was my best piece of writing yet. When I read it out, Mrs. Farmer said, "That was an excellent piece of work," and my ladybird hopped onto leaf 1. The angels had been replaced over Christmas. After English we did maths, and after maths we had assembly. The headmaster told us that the Ofsted inspectors had given the school a grade and it was satisfactory, which meant that we were doing okay, but not brilliant. He said we would have got a good, but there was an incident that upset one of the inspectors. Mrs. Farmer looked at Daniel and shook her head. Daniel's chin slumped onto his knees. There was a flash in my direction. I looked up. Sonia caught my eye, and for a millisecond I thought she was going to giggle, but then she turned away and nodded her head a few times, as if she was really listening to the headmaster's talk on New Year's resolutions. He said, "Aim high this year and give yourself a challenge. Don't just make boring resolutions like I must stop biting my nails or I must stop sucking my thumb." Everyone started to laugh. The headmaster smiled and waited for silence. Set a target that excites you, even frightens you a bit. I knew what mine was straight away. At playtime, I couldn't find Sonia. I waited on our bench and I looked around the playground and I went through the secret door, but she wasn't in the storeroom. She must have been in the toilets hiding from Daniel because she was scared. The dog in my chest growled louder than ever. We all went inside and we did history and geography, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept trying to look inside Sonia's pencil case to see if I could spot the blue tack ring. I was wearing mine and I tapped the white stone on the table a few times to try and get her attention. Sonia didn't look up from her books. At lunchtime I didn't hurry outside because I hate standing by myself. I missed Roger too much to eat my sandwiches, so I went to the toilet and played that game where the hand dryer is a fire-breathing monster. I was just taking it and being tough, and I didn't even scream when the flames burned off my skin and made all my bones go black. I heard a voice outside, not in the game but in real life. It was shouting, it was spiteful, and the words it said were curry germs. I looked out of the window. Daniel was following Sonia, yelling things at her back, and as she tried to walk away, he was with Ryan and Maisie and Alexandra, and they were laughing and cheering him on. He shouted, "You stink," and "curry breath," and "why'd you wear that stupid thing on your head?" He touched the hijab, actually tried to pull it off. That's when my heart roared, louder than a dog, louder than the fire-breathing monster in the toilets, louder even than the silver lion in the sky. The noise of it vibrated in my head and in my hands and in my legs. I didn't even realise I was running until the door smashed against the tiles and I'd left the bathroom and was halfway down the corridor. I charged outside and screamed, "Leave her alone!" People started to laugh. I didn't care. I looked one way then the other, searching for Sonia. I spotted her in the middle of the playground, her hands on her hijab, trying to stop Daniel from showing her secret hair to the whole school. "Leave her alone!" Daniel spun around. He saw me and his lips stretched into a nasty smile. "Come to save curry germs," he said. He pulled up his sleeves to fight. Ryan looked fierce. I skidded to a stop and waited for my mouth to say, "Yeah, I have come to save her," or "get out of my way," or something else that sounded brave. Nothing came out. I waited for my legs to walk forward so I could kick Daniel, but they were paralysed. More and more children were gathering around in a circle, everyone's eyes on me. "You're a loser," Daniel said, and everyone said things like, "Yeah," and "what a gay boy." And they were right. I took a step backwards. I didn't want to get my head kicked in. It hurt too much last time. Daniel turned back to Sonia. He grabbed the hijab with his fat fingers. Sonia started to cry. The crowd chanted, "Off, off, off, off." It reminded me of something, of being on stage, of the audience at the talent show. I wasn't in the playground anymore. I was in the theatre watching jazz, and those words, the words of a song, thundered through my veins. The playground came back in full sound and full colour. Sonia was sobbing, the hijab was half off, the crowd were cheering, Daniel was laughing, and I was letting him. "No!" I shouted it as loud as I could, screamed it. "No!" Daniel turned around in surprise. I pulled back my fist. Daniel's jaw dropped. I charged at him with all the anger that I'd ever felt. His eyes widened in fear, and when my knuckles hit his nose, Daniel collapsed on the floor. I hit him again, even harder, my fist smacking against his cheek. Sonia looked up, stared at me in amazement. I kicked Daniel 3 times, and each time my foot crunched against his bones. I said a different word. "Leave her alone. Ryan ran off. The crowd backed away. They were scared. Daniel was lying on the floor with his hands over his face. He was crying. I could have kicked him again. I could have stamped on him or elbowed him or thumped him in the stomach. But I didn't want to. I didn't need to. I'd just won my Wimbledon. The fat dinner lady blew the whistle. Mrs. Farmer sent me to the headmaster, but it was worth it, and I only missed a bit of history. When it was time to go home, I got my coat and 4 people said bye. They'd never talked to me before. I said goodbye, and they said, see you later. And one boy asked, you coming to football training tomorrow? I nodded my head really fast. Definitely, I replied, and he said, cool. Daniel heard all this but kept quiet. He didn't even dare look at me. His nose had stopped bleeding, but it was bruised, and his cheeks were red because he'd been crying all afternoon. Tears had dripped all over his fractions, smudging his answers. I only did 4 questions in maths. I felt all light and fizzy, lemonade in my veins, and my thoughts popped and bubbled in my brain. My leg kept twitching, and it brushed against Sonia's 5 times in 1 hour, 3 times by accident, twice on purpose. She didn't say, stop it, or your leg is bad news, or anything like that. She just gazed at the fraction and bit the top of her pen, and I got the feeling she was trying not to smile. I walked out of school, and the sky was turquoise, and there was a massive golden sun. It looked like a huge beach ball floating on a perfect blue sea. I hoped the sun was strong enough to shine right underground. I hoped Roger could feel it all warm on his body. I hoped he wasn't scared or lonely in his grave. I had a sharp pain in my chest then, like indigestion when you've eaten too many slices of pizza at one of those all-you-can-eat things. I leaned against a wall and put my hand on my heart and waited for it to pass. It faded to a dull ache, but it didn't go away. I heard footsteps and the tinkle of metal. I turned my head to see Sonia running towards me. Walking off without saying goodbye, she said, putting her hands on her hips. The sparkle was back, and it was brighter than ever. Her hijab was brilliant yellow, and her teeth were dazzling white, and her eyes shone with the strength of a million suns. She climbed onto the wall and sat next to me and crossed her legs, and I just stared at her as though she was a nice view or a good painting or an interesting display on the classroom wall. The freckle above her lip jumped about because she was talking. Walking off without letting me say thank you? I bit the inside of my cheeks to keep from smiling. Thank you, I asked, as if I had no idea what she was talking about. For what? She leaned forward and put her chin on her hand. That's when I noticed a thin blue circle wrapped around her middle finger. If envy is red and doubt is black, then happiness is brown. I looked from the little brown stone to the tiny brown freckle to her huge brown eyes. For saving me, she replied as I tried to act cool. For smashing Daniel's face in. She was wearing the blue tack ring. She was actually wearing the blue tack ring. Sonia was my friend. It was nothing, I said. It was amazing, Sonia replied, and she started to laugh. And the thing about Sonia is once she starts, she just can't stop, and it makes you laugh too. Don't thank me, girl M, I said, my sides aching and my smile bigger than a banana. Thanks, Spider-Man. Sonia put her hand on my shoulder and stopped giggling. You were better than Spider-Man, she whispered in my ear. It was too hot, and there wasn't enough air. I looked at the snow melting on the ground, and it was suddenly dead interesting and very important to kick at it with my foot loads of times. I'll walk back with you, she said. She stood up on the wall and jumped really high and landed by my side. Your mum, I said, looking all around in case she was watching. She said I'm bad news. Sonia linked my arm and grinned. Mums and dads don't know anything. On the way back, I told Sonia about Roger. I'm so sorry, she said. He was a nice cat. She'd never met him, but it didn't matter. Roger was a nice cat, the nicest cat. Everyone knew that. We bumped into the old man with the flat cap. Fred wagged his tail and licked my hand. It left a trail of sticky spit, but I didn't mind. You okay, lad? The old man asked, sucking his pipe. The smoke smelled like bonfire night. How are you feeling? I shrugged. I understand, the old man replied seriously. I lost my old dog Pip last year and it still hurts now. Got this rascal 4 months ago, he went on, pointing at Fred. Damn hard work he is. Fred jumped up and put his paws on my tummy. Seems to like you though, the old man said, scratching his head with the end of his pipe as if he was thinking. Now here's an idea. Why don't you come and give me a hand with young Fred? You can help me walk him. I stroked Fred's grey ears. That would be the best thing ever, I said, and the old man grinned. Good, good. I live in that house over there. He pointed at a white building a few metres away. Make sure you ask your mother, he said. I haven't got a proper mum, I replied, but I'll ask Dad. The old man patted my head. You do that, lad, he said. Down, Fred. Fred ignored him, so I grabbed his feet and pushed him off gently. His paws were fat and squishy. The old man clipped the lead on Fred's collar and hobbled off down the road, waving his pipe to say goodbye. I'll come too, Sonny said as we started walking again. I'll bring Sammy and we can have adventures. We stopped at a shop. Sonny said Sonny wanted to buy something for Roger. She only had 50 pence, so she bought a small red flower. When she paid, I saw something brown and fluffy on the corner. It gave me an idea. I got out my birthday money from Granny. The cottage drive was empty. Dad's car wasn't there. I should have felt guilty that I was letting a Muslim near our house when he was at the building site, but I didn't. Sonia's mum doesn't like me. Dad doesn't like Sonia. But just because they're grown-ups doesn't mean they're always right. That's where Roger's buried, I said, pointing to a rectangle of fresh mud in the back garden. Just under there. Sonia knelt down and touched the grave. He was a lovely cat. I crouched down. The loveliest cat, I replied. She held out her hand and looked at the ring on her middle finger. There's something you don't know, she said in a low voice that gave me goosebumps. About the rings. I stared at the little brown stone. What? I asked. What about them? Sonia looked all round the garden to make sure no one was listening, then grabbed my t-shirt and pulled me close. They can bring things back to life, she whispered. I didn't speak, though I had a billion questions, but only at night time. If we put the stones together on top of Roger's grave, when the clock strikes 12, he will have the power to climb out of the ground and catch mice and play in the garden. I started to smile. Will you come and see me? I asked. Of course, Sonny said. That's part of the magic. He'll jump right through your window and lie next to you and purr. He'll be all warm and furry, but he'll disappear when you wake up. He'll go back to his underground bed and he'll sleep all day so that he has lots of energy for his next midnight adventure. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. It made me feel better. Sonia took off her blue tack ring and pulled mine off my finger. Then she pressed the white stone and the brown stone together as I dug the little hole in the grave. She kissed the rings, and then I kissed the rings and we dropped them on the grave. We covered them up with mud and snow, and our fingers touched 4 times. Sonia laid the red flower on top. Roger's a magic cat now, she said, and the pain in my chest faded a little bit. There was a knock on the window. I jumped up and stood in front of Sonia, scared it was Dad, but it was just Jazz home from school. Next to her pink head was a bright green one. Jazz smiled happily and waved at Sonia, who peered around my legs and waved back. Jazz pulled Leo by the hand and dragged him into the lounge, kissing him on the lips before they disappeared through the door. The garden felt suddenly too small. There was nowhere to look, and my arms felt clumsy, and I was very aware of Sonia's body near my legs. I should go, she said, climbing to her feet but not meeting my eyes. Her hands and knees were wet through. My mum will kill me if I'm back too late. So much had happened that day. It felt strange saying goodbye. I didn't want her to leave. Sonia wiped her fingers on her thighs and held out her hand. Friends forever? She asked, her voice a bit higher than normal. Friends forever, I replied. We shook hands quickly, my palm hot against hers. When we let go, we glanced at each other and then looked away. I focused on a robin that was sitting on a branch. Its chest was red and its wings were brown and its beak was open. It was singing as if, Jamie? I jumped. Sonia smiled. Her hands moved up to her head. Brown fingers curled around the yellow material. She pulled the hijab down. Forehead, hair, straight, shiny hair that fell all the way to her shoulders in a black silk curtain. She blinked shyly. I moved closer. She was even prettier without the scarf. I looked at Sonia, really looked at her, trying to take everything in. Then I zoomed forward and kissed her freckle, and it was exciting and frightening, just like the headmaster had said our resolution should be. Sonia gasped and ran off, her perfect hair swishing in the wind. "See you tomorrow," she called over her shoulder, looking back one last time. I was worried I'd scared her, but she touched the freckle and grinned and blew a kiss right back at my face. Her eyes twinkled more than diamonds, and I felt like the luckiest, richest boy on the planet. I went inside and climbed the stairs and stared in the mirror. I was too big for the Spider-Man t-shirt. I pulled it over my head and threw it on the floor and checked my reflection. The superhero had disappeared. In his place stood a boy. In his place stood Jamie Matthews. I had a shower and put on a pair of pyjamas. Dad got home at 6. He made beans on toast. We ate it in front of the TV and he asked about our days. "Fine," I said. "Okay," Jazz replied. She wouldn't say anything about Sonia and I wouldn't say anything about Leo. It was nice to have a secret. Jazz only had 2 bites of toast and Dad had 3 beers. If Ofsted inspected my family, then I know what grade we'd get. Satisfactory. Okay, but not brilliant. But that's fine by me. Much later I went into Jazz's room, something hidden behind my back. She was painting her fingernails black and listening to music. There were lots of guitars and screaming and shouting. "What do you want?" she said, wiggling her hands in the air to make them dry. "You sent the t-shirt, didn't you?" I asked. Her hands stopped moving and she looked worried. "It's okay," I said. "I don't mind." She blew on her fingers. "Yeah, sorry, I just didn't want you to think Mum had forgotten." I sat on her bed. It was a good present. She dipped the brush in the black pot. "You don't mind that it wasn't from Mum?" she asked, painting her little finger. "I like it better because it's from you," I replied. "I got you this." I held out the brown, fluffy bear. To replace Bert. I pulled his eyes off and everything. Jazz put the new Bert on her lap, careful not to get polish on his fur. I stretched from the mattress to the stereo and stopped the music. "I want to tell you something," I said. "Something important." Jazz stroked Bert's fur. "You know the song you sang on stage?" She nodded slowly. "That's exactly how I feel about you." Jazz blinked back tears. The nail polish must have been really strong to make her eyes water. "Your strength gives me the courage to fly," I sang badly, and Jazz elbowed me in the ribs. "Get out of my room, you sickly little bastard," she said, but she was smiling, and so was I. So we're very, very close to the end of the story, just one chapter to go, but we'll save that one for next week. What I'd like you to have a go at doing, if you'd like to do an activity based on what we've read today, is to go back just to where Sonia was getting picked on by Daniel in the playground, and think about when Jamie heard the noise, heard the commotion from the toilets and ran outside to save her and ended up beating Daniel up. What I'd like you to do is think about Sonia's feelings, what was happening that day, and have a go at writing her diary entry that day. Explain from Sonia's perspective what was going on, how she was feeling. At the beginning of the day she was all really upset, she was ignoring Jamie, and then he came out and, as she said, he saved her, and he saved her from embarrassment, he saved her from being picked on. He beat Daniel up, which is not the right thing to do really, but in a way Daniel probably deserved it for being racist, for being mean and picking on Sonia. He certainly didn't deserve to get away with it this time, and so that's what I'd like you to have a go at doing, to write Sonia's diary entry for that day and think about how happy she was by the end of the day when things were back to normal, probably even better than normal with Jamie. Okay, you should spend about 10-15 minutes on that. Off you go.